Let's face it, this past year was just not it. From the overhanging threat of war between the United States and Iran to the onset of a global pandemic that made everyone forget that World War III literally almost happened, 2020 wasn't really anyone's year. However, there's been at least a small glimmer of hope for the black community and for other people of color. Many people within the United States and all around the world have had their eyes open to the still remaining issue of systemic racism. Finally, productive interracial discussions about police reform, as well as the everyday struggles of people of color, are now possible. As a black person, I appreciate seeing my white friends become advocates for me and against the hardships that black people face, which is something that they wouldn't have done before this past year. This is important, but what people aren't really talking about is the equally important related issue of criminal justice reform. According to the ACLU, the United States makes up only about 5% of the world's population, but it holds an overwhelming 25% of the global prison population. In order to get a better understanding of this issue, let's execute proper justice. First, we'll stop to search the evidence surrounding the problem. Next, we'll go undercover and investigate U.S. prisons, and lastly, we'll lock up the damaging practices of the U.S. justice system and release better ones. So first, let's stop to search the evidence surrounding the problem, incarceration issues. When it comes to looking into issues with incarceration within the United States, racial disparity and mass incarceration are two of the most impactful. In 2017, it was found by Pew Research that 70% of the U.S. prison population was people of color, with 33% being African American and 23% being Latinx. Let's put these numbers into perspective. Researchers at the NAACP found that if African American and Latinx communities had the same incarceration rate as white Americans do, then the U.S. prison population would drop 40%. Contrary to popular belief, this incarceration gap is not due to white Americans being less susceptible to committing crimes in comparison to their more dangerous and violent counterparts among people of color. This issue is due to the fact that the United States justice system was built upon a foundation of racism and white supremacy. From the 1790s, in which the Charleston Watch and Guard was formed as a slave patrol, to countrywide police departments enforcing the black codes and later Jim Crow after the Civil War, to Lyndon B. Johnson's war on crime that militarized the police, racism is embedded in the U.S. justice system, according to University of Pittsburgh Associate Professor of History, Keisha Blaine. This system almost got my brother suspended in 6th grade, which may seem insignificant and unrelated to the topic of criminal justice reform, but it is events like this that could lead to young children of color, like my brother, to being incarcerated if their accusers are taken too seriously. My brother's bus driver said he was hit in the back of the head with a shoe by an African American boy while driving. He insisted that it was my brother, although camera footage didn't make it clear as to who it was. All that anyone could tell is that the boy who threw the shoe was black, and that there were other boys on the bus messing around, as 6th grade boys do. My brother was nearly suspended due to racial profiling, which is defined by the Southern Poverty Law Center as the practice of law enforcement, and other authorities I might add, targeting individuals based on the color of their skin. Since that time, my brother has been called out as a disruptive student by several of his teachers for his seemingly unruly behavior. It doesn't help that he looks much older than he is and has a muscular build, fitting in with the dangerous black man stereotype, and forever leaving him susceptible to such injustice. Racial profiling is sharpened as a tool for racial disparity when combined with inherently racist policies such as the U.S. war on drugs. People of color are more likely to experience discrimination at every stage of the judicial system and are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and harshly sentenced. This is especially the case for drug law violations. Besides the issues that the United States has with racial disparity, the U.S. has a major issue with mass incarceration in general. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, there are 2.3 million people being held in immigrant detention centers, prisons, and jails in the U.S. The war on drugs is also cited by the Drug Policy Alliance as being one of the main reasons for the increase in mass incarceration. This mass incarceration has ripped families apart, and the role of racial disparity has led to these numbers being disproportionate, with 1 in 9 African American children with an incarcerated parent, compared to 1 in 26 for Latinx children, and 1 in 57 for white American children, which is still, of course, too many. We've gathered evidence, so now it's time to go undercover and investigate U.S. prison conditions. Racial disparity and mass incarceration create a system in which people are passed from the inequitable justice system to the soul-crushing arms of confinement. U.S. prisons are especially terrible. For example, photos from the St. Clair Correctional Facility show blood on the walls, on the uniforms, and in the toilets. There are ashes showing the remnants of fire in cells and dead prisoners tied up or hanging from twisted sheets. One inmate held in solitary confinement at St. Clair's has reported that his monthly mental health checks were only 5 to 10 minutes. In reaction, David Fathia said, "As a lawyer who's represented prisoners for more than 2 decades, I've come to expect such violence and degradation of human beings held in appalling conditions like those seen in these photos." The Equal Initiative for Justice has found that most prisons had inmates being tied up, beaten, raped, tortured, and even killed in prison detention facilities. Currently, the U.S. prison death rate is 275 to 100,000, which is the highest it's ever been, according to The Guardian. This is all possible because the United States doesn't have any prison regulation agency, allowing for prison conditions to deteriorate unchecked, and therefore the lives of inmates to be put in danger. Despite what U.S. prisoners allegedly have or have not done, no one deserves this type of cruel, dehumanizing treatment. Moreover, because of racial disparity and miscarriages of justice, a number of these prisoners facing these inhumane conditions are innocent and shouldn't even be there in the first place. A good justice system is one that only indicts those who are guilty and then later punishes them in prisons only for what they deserve, in safe, clean detention facilities. Our justice system here in the United States does neither of these things. We've done our investigation, so now it's time to lock up the harmful practices of the U.S. justice system and release better ones. And yes, it does include police reform. Being a police officer means having people's lives in your hands. As medical professionals have several years of training because of the sanctity of human life, law enforcement training, which currently only lasts 3 to 6 months, should also be over the course of several years and include multiple benchmarks and exams. Courses should include de-escalation skills, including weapon-free disarming techniques, anti-bias training, and behavioral psychology. In Finland and Norway, police go through rigorous training, including police college attendance, internships with current officers, and a criminal justice degree as requirements for joining law enforcement. Additionally, police departments need to be divided and specialized for different duties, such as traffic stops, searches, mental health crises, and public crises, such as shootings. We can't expect every officer to possess the sufficient skills and training needed for all these situations. We can see specialization working in Stockholm, Sweden, in which there's a special unit of paramedics that respond to mental health crises. We can also see this working in the Oregon cities of Eugene and Springfield, in which there's a force of unarmed medics and professionals that respond to psychological crises, which was 20% of their 911 calls in 2019. On a more communal level, we can band together to form citizens police oversight agencies in our own cities, which will hold police departments accountable, foster communication between police and citizens, and give proper attention to complaints. Finally, it's imperative that we lobby our lawmakers and president for the ratification of OPCAT, a UN Human Rights Treaty on the Prevention of Torture. This would allow for a new National Prison Oversight Committee and the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture to carry out random inspections and write humane policy, which could save lives. All these reforms may seem like too much, but the only way to fix a systemic problem is to completely change the system. Today, we've exacted justice by stopping to search for the evidence surrounding the problem, investigating U.S. prison conditions, and locking up the damaging practices of the U.S. justice system. There are a plethora of urgent societal and political reforms that need to be made in order to improve the United States, and it's going to be difficult to address them all. However, criminal justice reform cannot be put on the back burner. Taking steps toward reform now will lead to more lives freed in the future. There are too many people who are suffering or who will suffer in prisons if we don't. Thank you.